This is Real Talk, the Customer Insights Show with Jenn Vogel, a top-rated live stream and podcast in the market research and insights industry. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen on all major podcast channels. Join Jenn and her guests for a weekly discussion around topics that will help you understand your customers better. Real Talk is presented to you by Voxpopme, the leader in video research and ranked number 1 in qualitative research by Grit 2 years running. Here's today's conversation.
Hello, insights professionals, marketers, and everyone who wants to understand their customers better. I'm your host, Jenn Vogel. We talk all the time about human insights and, the importance of understanding humans as people and not just consumers or buyers or etc. And today we're going to broaden the conversation a little bit and talk more about humanizing business. What does that mean and how do we do it? So to discuss that topic, I'm very excited to be joined by Lonnie Mayne, author of Red Shoes Living and executive chairman at Voxpopme. Welcome to the show, Lonnie.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I've been trying to get on this show forever. So you guys finally let me on.
Finally let you on. Yeah, you have to, it's a very strict criteria to get on the show. No, I'm just joking. Really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise. Yeah, thank you.
So before we really get into the topic, can you give us a little overview about your career and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah. So I came out of college and spent the first 20 plus years of my life in really what turned out to be mergers and acquisitions over time, and working for companies that primarily manufacturing and distribution companies that were acquiring other organizations and bringing company cultures together and companies together and different mission, vision, values together. And then trying to, take that and then accelerate beyond future growth. And so I really kind of cut my teeth there. And then got into technology after that, invested in a small technology company at the time, after 20 years of M&A, and got into tech and started to focus on building a technology company, and took a lot of what I learned through mergers and acquisitions and the impact that it had on people when you went through kind of a tumultuous time of, bringing the cultures together, asking people to move. Sometimes people were leaving the company, and creating really what I call this compression and fear, with individuals, and then standing back in front of them and saying, hey, we want you to trust us now that we've gone through all this turmoil, and go to the next level and elevate our performance and elevate the growth of the company. And so it took a long time to kind of rebuild the trust. So that was the first part of my career. Jumped into technology, invested in that small technology company, and took a lot of what I learned in that first 20 years into the tech company. At the time, we had 14 people, and we grew it to over 1,700 people in 100 countries by taking some very basic, what I would call human principles, and then applying them back into the business and really applying them at everything we did, from leadership to the culture of the company, to the customer and client experience, and then to how we lived our lives, which became kind of the thing that turned Red Shoes Living into Red Shoes Living. So that's the journey in a nutshell.
That's awesome. I've known Lonnie. I've known you a while, and I didn't know about that earlier part of your career, and, really thought that Red Shoes was something that sort of evolved from, your previous role. But really, it sounds like it's been something that's been with you from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I remember an event where I worked for a company that we were around $2.5 billion in valuation, in revenue. And we, through acquisition, grew that to about $7.5 billion in 2 years. So as you can imagine, acquiring companies, bringing people together. And what I recognized all the way back then, that the human spirit was the most important thing in a company when you did that. Like, you had to keep the human spirit alive. You had to be authentic. You had to be honest. You had to talk about the tough things, as you went through an acquisition. And you had to listen to people and really connect with them at a human level. And if you could do that as a leader, then you could bring people along, rebuild the trust, kind of elevate their performance to achieve the goals of both the investors and the employees. And so, that's where it all started. And I think back on those times. It makes me feel really old, by the way, when I think about, now probably 31 years ago. Um, but again, the most important thing when you go through that is the human spirit. We spend half of our lives, if not more, at our jobs. There's 24 hours in a day. If you took or take the sleep time and push it away, let's just call it 8 hours. I'm not getting 8 hours right now, but I wish it was. Now you've got 16 hours, where you're alive and awake, and you're, in your personal life and your professional life. And what I realized is we had to kind of combine those two things. We had to create meaning in our professional worlds for people to show up and feel trust and be the best version of themselves. And so that's where all this work came from. And then the last thing I would say, Jen, is that we wanted to keep something simple. Business can be complex with the KPIs and the metrics and the challenges and competition. And what we said was, what were the basic behaviors that we could create that would connect all of us within a company and actually all of us around the world, that if we use that as a starting point, we could start to rebuild trust. We could start to rebuild, elevating performance, both personally and professionally. And so that's where we cut our teeth. So we started with 100 behaviors, 100 attributes, and we narrowed them down to 5 and said, if we could take these 5 things and apply them to, again, leadership, to the culture of the company, to the customer, client experience, vendor experience, stranger experience, whatever you want to call it, as well as to how we live our lives, then we probably have something. So that was the
Amazing. And so, there is very much a business impact to humanizing what we're doing and, focusing not only on the metrics, but actually,
right.
if you focus on the people, the metrics will come.
Right. That's exactly right.
And so maybe you started to talk about, gave us a little hint of the attributes and kind of
Yeah.
getting down to the 5. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the Red Shoes Living philosophy and the framework for building that highly engaged, meaningful culture?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'll take you back to a meeting and then I'll come right back to answer that question. But so 20 plus years ago, I'm in a meeting where we had brought 2 different cultures companies together into one location after we had gone through all this turmoil and change. And then a combined leadership group stood on a stage, including me, and talked to this group, right, that we had just taken through all this change. And we said, look, we bought the company and we brought ourselves together to be even more inclusive and powerful for our customers. And we were talking, and I noticed the sentiment of the audience. You could kind of see people's body language and how they were talking with each other. And about an hour into it, we took a break, and the leadership team that was presenting kind of this new thing went into a room, and we sat down and had a conversation, and everybody said, how do we think it's going? And they went around the room. I was the youngest leader in that group at the time. And so I was the last one to actually comment. And to the credit of the leadership team, they were all feeling what I was feeling. I'm like, I don't know that it's going well. I don't feel like that these people, this group trusts us with everything that we've taken them through. And so I also doubled down on that. And a question from one of the senior leaders to me was, what do you think we should do? And I said, I think we should go back out and actually address in an authentic way that, look, we really know that we've taken you through a lot of change. And in some cases, we had people that were in the audience that had been friends with people that maybe worked for the other company or even their own company that had been let go from the company. And so they're sitting there, thinking, I've made it, my friend hasn't made it. And I vacationed with his family for 20 years. I played golf with him every Thursday. So you could feel all of that. So as I kind of went through and opened my mouth, as a young guy, which I probably shouldn't have done, the senior leader said, Lonnie, I think you're right. I think we need to go back out and address the tough stuff. And I would like you to do it. And everybody kind of laughed. And I thought, oh, there we go. So I went back out and just started to talk about that. Well, in that process, what I recognized is if we can go back to the most common behaviors that we all have, most common elements, and reconnect with each other there, trust, kind of being one of those, then we can use that as a building point. So I came out of that meeting, we sat down with a group and I said, what are the behaviors that connect us, no matter where we are in the world, what country we come from, what nationality we are. And we came up with 100 different behaviors and attributes, like love. Everybody around the world has love and compassion. And so we listed all these things. And ultimately, we came down to 5 behaviors that we felt we could apply in the business world. And so hinting at those, as you mentioned, the 5, And these 5, we said we could apply to leadership, we can apply to the culture, we can apply to the customer experience, and then we can apply to how we live our lives. So it's just a starting point. And that is awareness, increasing our awareness of the impact that we're having on other people, increasing our awareness of how we're paying attention to other people. And awareness takes on a whole wide array, of implications. So awareness was the first one. Gratitude was the second one. Being incredibly grateful, for the health that we have, whatever that health is, the jobs that we have, the friendships that we have, the food that's sitting in front of us, the on and on and on and on. Like if we could flex the muscle of gratitude every day in business, then that would count for something. The third one is everybody has a story, and our stories change every day. If you think about the last 3 years, from COVID to civil unrest to wars, we've all gone through so much, and our stories have changed along the way. So as leaders, and as companies, if we can connect with our stories, like we can really connect with each other and learn about each other and know how to support each other, inspire each other, and become each other's advocates. So that was the third one. Kindness and respect. I'm fiercely competitive. Most of the people that I know are fiercely competitive, but if you can do that and be kind and respectful along the way, that counts for a lot. Some of the greatest leaders that I've had the chance to work for and work with are kind and respectful. They still hold you accountable, but they're kind people and they're respectful. So that was the fourth pillar. And then the fifth pillar is just 5, was putting yourself out there. Like every day we've got to put ourselves out there. We have to, create action and do good in the world. The Red Shoes living philosophy became stand out for the positive in how you work and how you live. And that was identified by each individual person in the company. So we took those 5 things and we said, all right, everybody, we're going to be aware of you and aware of your situation, aware of your stories. We're going to be grateful for you. We want to be kind and respectful to you. And yes, we're going to challenge you and push you and ask you to put yourself out there. And in return, we're going to do the same thing. And so that was the essence of Red Shoes Living and what it's become today and what I wrote the book about.
It's amazing that, there is, you've been doing this for a long time, but I think even it's being talked about even more now. I don't know if you see that too, than it was a few years ago, even, that there is a greater need for empathy in everything that's happening in business, in the world, in market research, in customer experience, all across the board. There is more conversation around, like, when I hear you go through those pillars, that's what strikes me. Each one, awareness, like, have some empathy for people. Everybody's got a story. Like if they're in a bad mood, it's probably not about you,
Right.
It's all like just kind of thinking about other people in a different way, and maybe more about them and less about us, is kind of a great place to be going.
Yeah. No, you've got it exactly. And I think, to your point, today more than ever, we've never been as busy as we are now. And I think about that and I ask the question, why? Well, we went through COVID together, globally, everybody around the world. So we're much more reflective today about what's important to us, how we want to work, who we want to work for, how many hours we want to work. Like all of that stuff is become more challenging for us, and so as a leader, in an organization, we now have to adapt to that. And so the leadership style that happened 3 years ago has changed dramatically. And in fact, it's changed even in the last year. So, that's why awareness, we say, is the gateway to everything we do, being aware of what's changed. We're going into somewhat of an economic difficulty, as we all know. And so just being aware of that and what is the impact on business? What is the impact on individuals? All of that comes into play. We have a concept, Jen, and I know you're aware of this because we've talked about that, but I think that is important to point out. It's called tapping into the 20. And if I can, hopefully I can describe this in a way that makes sense. But if you think of our life and 100% of the makeup of our life, like 100% of the activities that we do every day, 80% of that 100% are kind of the same things. We go to bed, we wash dishes, we wash, our clothes, we feed our pets, we take our children to their, dance recitals and to soccer and go to the grocery store, put gas in our car. Like all this stuff we do is about 80% of our day. But then there's this 20% that each one of us have that is our deepest desires, goals, and aspirations, right? It's what inspires us. I live in Park City, Utah. I love to get out in the mountains and mountain bike, and I love to ski in the wintertime. And that's part of my 20. I have pets and I have children. They're part of my 20. I have a significant other. She's part of my 20. health is part of my 20. So as leaders, from a red shoe standpoint, as we start to connect where appropriate with the individuals that we work with and learn what's important to them and what's in their 20, we now know how to support them, become their advocates, and inspire them based on their 20, not our 20. And that's part of the red shoes concept. And so that's something that's become incredibly powerful, over the last several years with everything that we've been through. And then, just one final point on that too, on the red shoes side of it, from a business perspective, we believe that anybody that is standing in front of you, regardless if it's a client, if it's a customer, if it's a competitor, if it's a stranger, if it's somebody serving you at a restaurant or you're at the store, is your customer. So even today, as I'm on your show, you're my customer. So I have to treat you appropriately from a red shoes standpoint. So some of these things have, dramatically changed over the last few years. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said about, kind of people being more selective with their time, and after a pandemic being more reflective. I read an article the other day that I thought was interesting in The Guardian about, people don't want bigger paychecks. They want, more views of the sunset. But it was framed in a way, is this the end of ambition?
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, it's interesting that people wanting to prioritize themselves, their 20s, take care of themselves more, is indicative of the end of ambition. Somehow you can't have both. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I love this. In fact, the first response I had was, I talk about energy transfer. So I think what's happened is, because we're more reflective now, we're still ambitious. And in fact, we're probably more ambitious today than we've ever been, both professionally and personally. And so I think what's happened is we are choosing to nourish our 20%, our center, like what's important to us. The energy transfer of doing that transfers back into the work that we do, to the relationships that we build, to how we navigate in the world. At least that's the way for me. And I call it following the sun. And all of us have a little different angle of that. But, when I wake up in the morning, I get a cup of coffee and go outside and literally look at the sun, or I go out and paddleboard. Well, that energy that I'm creating, and that's part of my 20, like what's important to me, transfers into the work that I do. And so if I am just all work and no play, which is kind of an adage from the old days, then it creates a dull person. I can't perform at a 10. Maybe I'm performing at a 7. So for me, I think we're more ambitious today, but we've chosen to be more ambitious in a positive way. It's not all about the biggest house, the best car, the most money that we're making. It's about meaning. In fact, I think, creating a meaningful life for all of us means a little something different, but that's what's changed. I've never been more inspired today or in any other time than today. And it's because of that. And I'm seeing people do some amazing things. And, the other side of that too, is there's some people that are lost in that a little bit because the world has shifted, and think of remote work. You've heard me say this before. I hope that we keep the element of Zoom, where somebody can hold their child on their lap, or wear a ball cap, or the dogs are running around in the background, or, the husband walks down the stairs in a bathrobe, not knowing, that his wife is on a phone, or whatever the case may be, because it's humanized us. That's who we really are. So I hope those components never change. So yeah, back to the ambition. I think we're more ambitious today than we ever have, but it's more of a meaningful ambition. It's a positive ambition. And as leaders, in organizations or even outside, we have to figure out, all right, so now how do we support that? How do we create the space for people to be the best version of themselves and still hold them accountable, right? Accountability is part of that. So.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. I had the same sort of reaction. I was like, I think people are more ambitious to actually take care of themselves,
Yeah, totally.
Instead of just being all work and no play, as you say.
Right.
And so, as we're talking today about humanizing business, how do you define that? What does it mean to humanize business?
Yeah, I think it's again a great question. I think it defines itself by who the individual is. So my definition of that might be something a little different than other people. But if you're asking people again to spend half their life working in an organization, you have to care about them. You really do. That goes both ways. There are leaders today too that I speak with that, they put so much out there with their teams, but they also want something back from them. So I think humanizing business is just understanding, again, what's in the 20, what's important to people. My chief of staff within Red Shoes Living is Nancy Williams, and her mother is a little bit older now, and she's taking care of her. In fact, I just got off a call with her, and she said, "Lonnie, I'm not going to be listening in this time." She's heard me talk 1,000 times, but I'm going to go and take care of my mother and do some things with her. Well, immediately as a leader, I know that's in her 20. And so the first thing I did was absolutely supportive. Let me know how it goes. What else can I do to support you? Like, that's what's changed. It's not all about us. It's not all about the company. It's about other people. So slowing down and listening and paying attention, I know you and I have the pleasure every week of, just having a conversation that's supposed to be non-business related, right? It's about what's in our 20. And most of the time it stays there. I know it drifts a little bit from time to business, but I think little changes like that in today's world mean a lot to people. So I think, for me and the leaders that I'm working with, that's the biggest change is that we have to care. We're human. We have to care about people. I tell a story that in COVID, maybe 4 months into COVID, client of mine, a financial client, I were on the phone. We were not on Zoom. Very nice lady. And we were chatting, and all of a sudden she kind of went quiet, and we were talking business, and she went quiet. And I said, "Are you okay? Are you still there?" And she said, "I am." She said, "Just forgive me for just a minute." She said, "My husband, I've got my office door open in my house. My husband is walking across the living room into the kitchen, and he's moving a little slower today." And I said, "Oh," and she said, "He's got liver cancer that he's been dealing with. And I'm just paying attention. Just give me a minute." Of course, recognizing that in the moment, that's what was in her 20. Nothing else mattered that I was going to say in that moment. So I sat quietly, and she came back. And two things occurred to me. The first thing was, was from New York City in a high-rise, tower, financial tower in New York. And in my mind, I was still envisioning her there. And I realized, like everybody else around the world, we were in lockdown and we were home. And then the second thing is that there wasn't a thing that I was going to talk about outside of her husband. And I just said, "I'm sorry, tell me more about that. How long has he had it?" We talked for 15, 20 minutes about her husband, and then eventually got onto some business, but it was kind of a shorter slide on the business side, and hung up. And I thought, that's the world we live in today, where we're connecting, with each other. We care about our stories. We care about our health, our collective health. So I think, all of those components today are what has changed. So for a leader that is kind of running past all that, that's why we had the Great Resignation. People were more reflective. And so leaders are having to work harder, but they're having to work harder in a much more human and much more better way, in my opinion. So
Yeah, for sure. And one of my favorite things I read years ago, it was specifically around marketing and sales collaboration, but it could apply really to anyone. It was like, the most important thing you as a head of marketing need to know about your sales leader is how they take their coffee.
yeah.
And and I sort of take that with me, having setting time aside for those conversations that are not business related, to get to know people. You work better with people that you understand what's going on in the background, and what's important to them. I've given that our team was sort of not fully remote, but certainly distributed prior to COVID, we were so lucky that we had some of those conversations that were already on the calendar, right?
Right.
So the rule is, do not talk about business. We just want to hear about Netflix recommendations and, what you did on the weekend, and how that changes how you work together. Building those relationships that you can't build if you're not in an office, seeing each other physically and getting lunch or getting a cup of coffee or something like that. Recreating that in a virtual environment is quite different.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're seeing, I know on the Slack channel that I'm part of with Voxpopme, there's, I can't remember the hashtag, but
enjoying life.
Enjoying life. You're right. It's one of my favorite things to go to and look at, because you're seeing people kind of living their lives, and maybe even part of their 20%, what's important to them. And just kind of humanizing it. We work so hard at what we do, and committed, as I've worked with all of you, you can see the commitment to the clients and the product and everything. But then when you see the human side of people, it just really energizes you. So I think that's the new. And by the way, I think it's a much more difficult style of leadership. It's easy to hold people accountable to metrics and KPIs and say, I'm going to pay you X as long as you do this. And in many cases, that's the way the world's been for a long time. Not saying there hasn't been inspiration or humanizing business or any of that, because there has been. But today, you have to go further, again, where appropriate with that. That said, as a leader, as individual leaders, we're all leaders in any organization at every level. And you kind of referred to this. If we're not taking care of ourselves physically and mentally, and the mental health part of this is a big part of it today, then we cannot take care of others. So whatever that means for the individual, whether it's doing yoga or CrossFit or running or hiking or mountain biking or meditation or, whatever it is, we getting better sleep, which is a big one for me. We have to do more of that if we're going to take care of ourselves and if we're going to take care, of those that we work with and work for. It's critically important.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you go into businesses all the time and talk about this stuff. Like, do you ever find that it's difficult to convince leadership teams of the impact that this will have by having this level of focus, or do people pretty much get it?
So if Nancy was here, I would ask her to respond, because she sits on most of the meetings that we're in. I would say about 10% of the time we go into an organization that understands that they need to bring more of what you and I are talking about today to the company. But because of their current culture, maybe they're a little cynical about, can it really have impact? But when you look at companies like Microsoft, Satya, the CEO of Microsoft, and you mentioned empathy earlier, one of the themes that he's brought to the company was putting empathy at the center of everything they do, from how they sell to how they service, to how they build their products and services and platform, et cetera, et cetera. And where that came from, for him, was he had a son that had some physical challenges from birth that I think he just passed away here about a year ago. And through the experience in his own personal life, he learned to be empathetic, to his son and his challenges and things that happened. So he brought that back into the business world. So when you start to talk about great leaders like that, like I said, 10% of the time, and, there are companies that say, bring us in, but they're like, this seems maybe a little soft. It's not soft. Being kind and respectful does not mean you can't be competitive, right? Or hold people accountable. It just means that we choose to show up for each other in a different way. So to answer your question, Jen, definitively, the best-in-class companies, best-in-class leaders subscribe, to the Red Shoes Living way, or to a way that's more focused on that. And in fact, I think you'll find this interesting, and maybe others listening in too, is that the number one attribute, the number one trait that we find with successful leaders, and when I say successful leaders, we're not defining it by their title or how much money they make, but it's just saying, what's the definition of success? Like, what's the one trait that you think you have that's different than everybody else? And it's gratitude. Successful leaders, when we've interviewed them, gratitude is the number one consistent thing that comes up, which is a pillar in Red Shoes Living. And if you think about that, grateful leaders, they're grateful for everything. They're grateful for their teams. They're grateful for the company. They're grateful for the challenges and grateful for the competition, because it makes us keener and better and smarter and, whatever. So they flex that muscle of gratitude, which opens a space around them that allows people to kind of come in and connect with them, as opposed to being ungrateful, where your world becomes small and you become cynical and you're always wondering, why are we not getting the deal? Why are we not getting the right people? Why are we not getting the right opportunities? And that perpetuates. And so you've got this grateful leader that's opened up a world where people step in, they want to go to work for them, they want to work together, et cetera, et cetera. And this, opposing ungrateful world where it's cynical, small, people just can't step into that space. So that's the one thing that we've recognized with great leadership, from Satya, at Microsoft, to all the way through the organizations that we've been able to work with, is they're grateful. They really are. So that's been interesting in terms of kind of soft research, if you will, or soft science.
Yeah, for sure. Gratitude is not easy. It's
No.
it is hard to maintain that, like you said, grateful for the challenges, grateful for the competition. Like, sometimes that is hard to get to.
Yeah, sometimes it's just not great. And I think it's a great point that you bring up just quickly. Sometimes we just have a bad day. Sometimes things that happen to us are not great. It's not like we're trying to look at it and go, well, I'm going to turn it into a positive, because no, not everything is positive. But I do think, a high percent of the time when we can say, well, all right, what does this open up for us? Like if this challenge came our way, and that question, the power of question, what does it open up for us? I think that's a question. A mentor of mine taught me that when COVID happened, my business shifted a lot like everybody else's. And I was complaining. I became small and cynical, that very person I talked about. And he listened to me for about 25 minutes. And he said, Lonnie, I have one question that I think will change everything. Yes, you're challenged. Yes, your business has shifted. You're going to have to figure out how to pivot and do whatever. But what does it open up for you? And I had never pondered that. As I pondered that, I started thinking, well, I can write new content. Maybe I can write a new book. On the personal side, I've got 3 boys, and a daughter, and I can spend more time with them and play golf. And so now, as I move forward, when I hit a roadblock or a challenge, or maybe even an opportunity, I can ask myself that question. All right, what does it open up for me? Like the virtual world, we started doing keynotes and leadership meetings all over the world where I didn't have to travel. I could literally sit with no red shoes on and be barefoot in my office that nobody could see, and do these events. And so, I, by the way, I think what's important here, everything I'm talking about, I've either learned from somebody else, a mentor, maybe a little bit of that I've created, but for the most part, it's been collaborative, so that's what I love about it, is I get to learn from other people and apply it in my own world and become better for it.
Yeah, for sure. And any examples in your experience where you've seen businesses like really like you've seen the turnaround, the sort of the before and after, the impact of of incorporating this more empathetic human style of leadership?
Yeah, there's a number, and again, if Nancy was with us today, I'd have her share. But one specifically stands out to me. We had a leadership team, a global leadership team that we've been working with for a year, and we took the Red Shoes Living, philosophy, mindset, and framework into the company in those areas that I talked about earlier in the podcast. And so now we're about 7 months in with this group, when we would get together once a month for an hour and a half and speak about the impact that it was having, in the company. And so it was always very inspiring. And we were learning from each other, each other's version of Red Shoes Living, et cetera. But one of the things that really started to come to the forefront when you build a culture like this is vulnerability. What I've seen today is great leaders are vulnerable. They'll pick up the phone and call me, or I'll pick up the phone and call somebody else and say, hey, I'm challenged here. Have you ever experienced this? Can you help me with that? I think that most people think that, the higher you go in an organization, the bigger the ego comes. It's the opposite. There's more collaboration at a higher level with, different companies and what have you. So we're on a Zoom call, and we're talking about vulnerability and the fact that we can all share our personal and professional experiences and then grow together, right? And a gentleman said, I want to share something with everybody. He said, over the last several months, as we've been going through COVID and working remote, I went through a personal change in my life, and I'm separated from my significant other now, but we have 2 children. I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment, and we go back and forth, the children go back and forth. And he said, when I have to do calls, Zoom calls, whether it's with clients or even with all of you, and I have my children, they're young, I am in a closet doing these Zoom calls. And he flipped the light on, and he took his laptop, and he just kind of moved around the closet. And sure enough, he was in a closet. And it kind of just paused everybody. The fact that he felt the trust, the safety to be open and vulnerable to share that. And I remember the chat at that time on Zoom just lit up from people all over the world saying, didn't know, we're here for you. Can we support you? Thanks for sharing. Like those moments. So, what does that do? Well, when you have a company and a culture and leadership that allows you to also kind of be vulnerable and open, that individual in that experience, and I've, spoke with him, would run through walls for the company because they supported him as he was going through his own personal changes. So that, as complex as that is, that's the level of leadership now, as we've gone through this change, that we have to be at. And it's not easy, but that's the intimacy where it's appropriate. Again, people are private. So there's that element of it as well that we have to go to. But literally, when you do pay attention to people in that way, they'll run through walls for you. They will perform at the highest level because they appreciate and respect, the attention you're giving to them as a human being.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen the same thing, right? When people are taken care of on the personal side, the human side, they will run through walls. And on the flip side of that, if you try to force someone to do a certain level of work when they're going through a difficult time, or they don't have the mental capacity or the bandwidth emotionally to deal with it, you're not going to get 100% anyways.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
kind of forcing people to, sure, you can take time off for that very serious personal matter once you finish your work. It's like, no, what are you going to get in that time? Right?
Yeah.
What kind of output do you actually get?
Right. Well, and I think, even within Voxpopme, one of the things I've learned is that when people take holiday or vacation, the executive team gets together, and says, how can we support that person so they can take whatever the time frame is, the week or even the 2 weeks, so they don't feel like they have to constantly check in. So there's a layer that's built in from the leadership team that says, look, if Jenn's going on vacation, let's make sure that she stays on vacation. There's enough of us within the organization. If we need Jenn, we know she's going to be there for us. But if not, let's protect her. Let's protect that. So it's that symbiotic relationship that says, let's do our part to support her. She's going to do her support when she gets back to support us, and away you go. So like these little changes, these little tweaks are significant as it comes to, progressing a company and the culture of the company, et cetera. It's meaningful.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. This has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about you, Lonnie,
Oh
more
boy.
than I thought I would. No, this has been great. I thought I knew everything there was to know, but I didn't. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jenn. It's a pleasure to be with you, and in working with you a little closer over the last several months, I've learned a lot about you in the most positive way too. So thanks for your leadership, and thanks for having me on. I hope it was somewhat productive for everybody. So
Absolutely. And thanks to everybody for listening in. Thanks, Tom Doherty, for jumping in and adding your comments to this conversation today. Next week, we're going to be back with Kyle Papanikolaou of McDonald's for another episode. We'll see you then.